Hello and welcome to the third in a series of short podcasts to help stimulate your mind in the support of the forthcoming deadline for the Consumer Duty Annual Assessment. As a reminder, the deadline is the 31st of July 2024. My name's Lisa Martin and I'm joined again today by Martin Sykes to talk through and bring to life some of your thoughts surrounding pulling your assessment together. Today's podcast will focus on the third of the consumer duty outcomes, that of consumer understanding. Just looking and reflecting back on our last two podcasts, where we covered both products and services and price and value, the consumer understanding today is something that we will particularly focus on. And therefore, Martin and I will talk about perhaps a little bit about the background on this particular one on consumer understanding, particularly given this is an annual report on your consumer duty. So Martin, let's just kick off. A wee bit of background on this specific consumer duty of consumer understanding, some positioning for us. How could you help us?
Yeah, so I think on this one, very central to our market. So I think when we talked about price and value a little bit more, where it's sort of edge of that one in some senses. This one definitely not. It's right in our market. It's what we do. We're in front of the customer. We're explaining products. We're communicating the reasons for advising what we've advised or selling what we've sold. So this is definitely one where we have a really significant part to play. I think the big move in consumer duty rules wise was it sort of moved the threshold from the old fair, clear, fair and not misleading or fair treatment of customers to one of good outcomes. So pre-consumer duty, a fair outcome really is giving the customer some information about the product that we could reasonably expect them to engage with and understand. And they can engage with it and understand or not, but we've treated them fairly in doing it. Consumer duty really raises that hurdle to one of good outcomes, which really means in this space that the customer does understand reasonably the core elements of what they're doing and why they're doing it and what they're buying. And so FCA really talk about communications meeting the customer's needs, be likely to be understood, and then kind of playing that out into the sort of how do you know that they did, into that part of it. And so the big touch points for us are particularly on the communication pieces around what we're doing. So the materials that we think of as being the initial disclosure document and the surrounding discussion of that, very much into financial promotion, so how we promote our services and products, and then very much into the verbal and the written communications in the advice process. So our explanations of the lender and the provider documentation as we present them, and then our own presentation of our advice in the verbal interactions, and then in the recommendation letter or suitability report or whatever you refer to that written piece as. Okay,
so those are all sort of process-driven things, I think, to a degree. Would you agree? In terms of the expectation here is, pre-consumer duty, this is what was done, and it might have been TCF and all of that. But now we've raised the bar, we've probably put some new processes in, we've probably done some different things in terms of each of the businesses. So it would be outlining perhaps a wee bit more about what we've done with the consumer understanding in mind, so that they fully understand what they're buying into, what their services that they get in, and what product they've come away with that.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the changes that probably most firms made during consumer duty was kind of changing the structure of key communications. So FCA really talk about communications being led, so most important things being brought to the top, we've talked about lots of times.
Yeah.
Made engaging, so the text is laid out. The layout is that it helps customers get through it, communicate at the right time, and dumbed right down in terms of in terms of language. And I think the review now, so the annual assessment is an opportunity that we should take to stand back and say, did that work?
Yeah.
So do we think that consumers are engaging better, understanding better the communications now, and beyond that comparative to an absolute of are we happy with the the sort of outcomes that they're getting from that? And I think also hopefully a bit of a change through Consumer Duty around the way in which the verbal elements of the process occurred as well. We should also sort of move forward some of those those metrics. So I think in terms of reporting, I think some call back to what was done during the Consumer Duty project, and some commentary around how well we think that's worked, and then probably some some thinking around what management information helps us to say helps us to say whether or not the consumers are understanding what we're doing or not.
And so I suppose some examples of the MI and the areas to focus on there in terms of testing this yourselves as businesses, and could be looking at perhaps areas of persistency on protection.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a few that we can think of here, and a few that FCA call out, either in the guidance or in the course of the things that they issue, in the various bits of guidance that they issue during implementation of Consumer Duty. When we talked about persistency in the first of these podcasts, it is a very, very strong indicator of sales quality, very reliable when numbers are where you've got enough numbers in the pot to tell. And FCA would link that to this outcomes as well as the products and services one that we talked about. So customers who don't understand the product are less likely to understand its value and more likely to seize it early, and therefore that will fall through into persistency numbers. So persistency tends to be distributed with a long tail. So most advisors are very good on persistency. The average is dragged down by outliers down the distribution. Sure. So advisors with persistency that's down the distribution tail, that there is work to do there to investigate the reasons, and FCA would connect that to this. So the explanation of the product or the customer's understanding of its of its relevance to them. So definitely one worth looking at. And I think probably again, linked to persistency, it's kind of it's sort of its friend in the world of MI of failed claims is another one. I mean, a lot of firms won't have enough data to build up that data, but particularly claims where the customer has made a claim that they expected to succeed but it didn't. Again, those are indicators that they didn't understand the product on the way in the way that we hoped. So the product might be entirely suitable under those circumstances, but they might just not have understood, exactly how the cover was going to respond. Okay.
It probably brings me on to the more, what we do within the business in terms of the principle and how the business runs. And I suppose one of the other assessments on consumer understanding is looking perhaps at the file review outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. I think, file review outcomes can tell us a lot about how we've done the written bit of the process in particular. It doesn't, of course, speak to necessarily the customer's understanding in the round. So they may have taken a lot of understanding from the verbal interaction, not that much from the written stuff. But from a reg perspective, FCA are always going to be interested in that bit, the prevailing written record. And so I think, the thing to do with file review outcomes is to try and isolate elements, findings from those that speak to poor written communication or poor descriptions.
Yeah.
So actions off the back of file reviews that say we need to write another letter to the customer to just explain this other bit to them, or we're not sure we've explained that bit properly, or we didn't issue something. Those would all be linked to this particular outcome. So high levels of follow-up letters, probably something that's frequent in the industry as a whole, and definitely one that needs to be considered here.
And how about the we talk about the customer understanding, but it's sort of, I suppose, the other area of it is sort of the overlay, if you like, in terms of vulnerable customers as well.
Yeah, and I think vulnerable customers is a very vexing subject, isn't it? It's not always obvious who's vulnerable, and how we sort of understand that. I mean, what's very clear though is that certain types of vulnerability cause customers to engage very differently with the communications that we put in front of them.
Yeah.
So that can be the sort of vulnerabilities that lead to lack of attentiveness.
Sure.
Those can be the sort of things you might put into the life events or the health piles of the vulnerability triggers. But then also the sort of the neurodiverse and those kind of things, those can be very difficult because the customer can create every appearance of being very very engaged. I think in terms of the report though, it is really important, I think, to recognize vulnerability here, to try to call out where different processes have been followed for vulnerable customers, and again, it's sort of the proportionality of that depends on the size of the firm.
Yes,
so small firms might be more anecdotal in terms of what they say here, or calling out individual customers. Larger firms should be thinking about calling out data. So how many customers do we have, and what can we show that we did differently with them? But and then probably again in the larger firms, did we see any difference in things like file review outcomes or monitoring outcomes for vulnerable cohorts and non-vulnerable cohorts? So that kind of sets of MI. But you do need numbers. You do need numbers for that to be to be a worthwhile exercise.
Right. Okay.
So in the smallest firms, they will be working from knowledge, memory, and how they've approached those cases. So I think it is a very difficult one, but we should definitely be addressed in this area of the report.
Okay, so the shout out is definitely to address that then. So that's something to take away from today. Anything else in terms of the consumer understanding that we could sort of guide our members have included? We talked about persistency, we talked about failed claims, talked about file reviews, talked about vulnerability. Anything else that we think would be good to reflect on in terms of how firms support that of consumer understanding?
So a couple of things. I mean, FCA talk about testing, monitoring, and adapting. So they use that language in the guidance in the rules. And what they mean by that is put out what you think will work, see whether it does work through monitoring, and where you think you can improve it, adapt it. And a bit like some of the other things that we've talked about, there's no de minimis in that guidance. So they expect that of all firms who are communicating with customers. So it's not a do it or don't do it, but it's how much of it you do based on how big you are and what's reasonably proportionate. So I think that does need to be reflected, I think, in the reporting. So it's this question of how do we know that customers are understanding what we're doing, and is there anything that we should do differently to make sure that they do? And I think in small firms, we and a lot of other people talked about customers' own words testing. So
Yeah.
During advice processes, just the sort of tests of, can you just tell me how you understand this works, or where you'd be able to claim, or
The replaying,
what the term of the mortgage is, or those kind of, what will happen after the fixed deal period, those kind of questions. And I think playing those back through in the small firms, smallest firms, probably that's enough. But playing through, we've done that, this is what we found, and it was fine or it was not fine, and therefore we decided to do some things or not do some things. Just those words in the report, I think, would really help. I think in bigger firms, again, you start to drop into things that are more complex. So then we should be thinking a little bit about what we're seeing from consumer surveys, sale questionnaires, and those kind of things. And I think that sort of feedback from post sale questionnaires that say, really help me understand it, and those kind of things play positively. They don't solve the problem, but they play positively. I think complaints, again, it's not a brilliant piece of MI unless you've got loads, and then we all hope we don't have loads.
We don't.
But the complaints that show poor understanding, I expected X to happen and it didn't, and those are a piece of MI that you can use here as well. So I think that kind of set of criteria of complaints, persistency, failed claims, customer survey outcomes, things from file reviews, and a vulnerable customer overlay across them is really what the report should cover, in varying degrees of complexity and detail, depending on how big or small the firm is.
Okay, that's a really good summary, Martin. So thanks for doing that for me in terms of a summary. We'll finish for today. We'll come back to you on the fourth customer outcome, where we're looking at customer support. But as previously mentioned, you have any queries, questions that you want to ask of Martin, then clearly you can send those through into our TMA compliance box as per our website, and we will wrap any questions up in a final podcast at the end of our 4 consumer outcomes videos. So for today, thank you again, Martin, for your support. Thank you for listening, and until next time, we'll see you soon.